The briefing room at Bagram Airfield fell silent when the mission parameters appeared on screen. 8 Navy SEALs trapped in a valley so narrow that Apache gunships had already turned back twice. Taliban forces closing from 3 sides. 40 minutes of daylight remaining. The Air Force captain running the Tactical Operations Center looked at the roster of available close air support and felt his stomach tighten. Only one aircraft was fueled, armed, and ready. Only one pilot was standing by. He keyed his radio with reluctance that bordered on dread. "Hog 37, you're up for immediate tasking." The response came back in a voice that made half the room exchange glances. Calm, measured, with an accent that carried traces of rural Montana. "Hog 37 copies, spinning up now." Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Cove's callsign, Reaper, was 41 years old and had more combat hours in the A-10 Thunderbolt than most pilots accumulated in their entire careers. She'd flown her first combat sortie over Iraq in 2004, back when female pilots were still considered experimental additions to the close air support community. That deployment had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross. The 3 deployments after that had earned her a reputation that made seasoned forward air controllers request her by name. But tonight, in this briefing room full of personnel who'd never worked with her, all they heard was a woman's voice, volunteering for a mission that had already defeated 2 gun teams. The young Marine liaison officer actually laughed, not cruelly but with the kind of nervous dismissiveness that comes from fear seeking an outlet. "They're sending a single ship. Now," he looked at the Air Force captain. "Sir, with respect, those SEALs need—" "Those SEALs need someone who won't flinch," the captain interrupted, though his own doubt was visible. He'd read Cove's service record, knew she'd pulled off saves that belonged in flight school case studies, but he'd also spent 6 months at Bagram watching pilots wave off from missions less complicated than this one. The valley was a death trap, 50-foot margins on either side, AAA nests on the ridgelines, surface-to-air missiles that had already locked Apache fire control systems twice. Outside, on the darkening flight line, Adrian Coves performed her walk-around inspection with movements so practiced they bordered on ceremonial. The A-10 Thunderbolt waiting for her wasn't beautiful. It was a machine built around a gun, an airframe designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. Tonight it carried a full combat load. 500 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium, 6 AGM-65 Mavericks, 2 rocket pods, and enough flares to light up half of Helmand Province. She ran her hand along the fuselage where previous battle damage had been patched. The metal was scarred, dented, testament to missions that should have ended differently. Her crew chief staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes watched her with the protective intensity of someone who'd worked with her through 4 deployment cycles. He knew what she was walking into. "Colonel," he said quietly, "that valley's got teeth." Adrian looked up at him. Her flight suit bore patches from squadrons that no longer existed. Her survival vest showed where that spoke of years spent in cockpits. But her eyes, in the fading light, carried something that made Hayes remember why he'd extended his enlistment twice to keep working her aircraft. They carried the absolute certainty of someone who'd already survived the unsurvivable. "Every valley has teeth, Marcus." She pulled on her helmet, adjusted the chin strap with fingers that showed no tremor. "Question is whether they're sharp enough." Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the SEAL team leader's voice crackled over the radio net with the controlled urgency of someone counting ammunition and watching the sun sink toward the ridgeline. "Any station, Sabre 16, we are 15 minutes from being overrun. Request immediate close air support. I say again, immediate CAS." The Air Force captain keyed his mic. "Sabre 16, Hog 37 is launching now. Time on station 12 minutes. There was a pause, then, "Hog 37, your single ship." "Affirmative. Hog 37 is a fully mission-capable A-10. Stand by for authentication and talk on." Another pause, longer this time. In the background, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. "Copy. Sabre 16 is. "We're ready for any support available." The translation was clear to everyone in the operations center. They were desperate enough to take whatever was coming. Adrian's A-10 lifted off from Bagram with the characteristic roar of the General Electric turbofans mounted high on the fuselage. She climbed through 7,000 feet, leveled off, and pointed her nose toward the mountains that separated Bagram from the Tangi Valley. The sun was touching the peaks now, painting them in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, if you didn't know what waited in the shadows below. She checked her weapons systems. Everything showed green. The GAU-8 Avenger, the 7-barrel Gatling gun that formed the heart of her aircraft, was loaded and hot. She'd fired that gun in anger more times than she could count. Knew its recoil, its sound, the way it made the entire airframe shudder like a living thing. Tonight she'd probably need every round. Sabre 16, Hog 37 is 8 minutes out. Authenticate Bravo Charlie. Hog 37, Sabre 16 authenticates Delta Foxtrot. The SEAL team leader's voice was tighter now. "We've got multiple technicals moving into blocking positions. Need gun runs on coordinates I'm about to send." "Copy, send coordinates and mark method." What came back made Adrian's jaw tighten. 9-line brief, troops in contact, danger close. The coordinates placed the enemy less than 100 meters from the SEAL position. The valley walls were 200 feet apart at the narrowest point. Wind was gusting 15 knots crosswind, and the SEAL team was low on smoke grenades, which meant they'd be marking their position with infrared usable only if she dropped low enough to acquire with her targeting pod. Every detail screamed trap. Sabre 16, Hog 37 copies your 9-line. Be advised, I'm going to need you on the ridgeline for visual confirmation. This canyon's going to make targeting systems unreliable. Hog, we're pretty exposed up here. Then get lower. I can't risk hitting your position without eyes on confirmation of enemy location. There was a moment of silence, then copy, moving now. Adrian nosed her A-10 down, descending toward the valley entrance. The terrain rose around her like the walls of a cathedral built by something ancient and hostile. She could see the river snaking through the canyon floor, the scree slopes that marked old rock slides, the dark openings of caves that could hide anything. The light was failing fast now, the sun dropping behind the western ridge. She had maybe 20 minutes before darkness made visual navigation suicidal. The Marine liaison officer in the operations center was watching the drone feed now, the grainy thermal imagery that showed the SEAL team as white figures pressed against a boulder field. Enemy forces, at least 30 fighters, were moving through the southern approach. "Jesus," he whispered, "they're about to get enveloped." The Air Force captain didn't respond. He was watching Adrian's altitude indicator drop as she descended into the valley. 5,000 feet, 4,000, 3,000. The terrain was rising to meet her. If she went much lower, she'd be within range of small arms fire. Every fighter with an AK-47 would have a shot. Hog 37, Sabre 16 has you visual. Enemy forces are in the tree line bearing 185 from our position. How copy? Adrian rolled inverted for 3 seconds, getting a visual reference on the SEAL position. She saw them, 8 figures with the distinctive equipment profiles of Special Operations Forces, spread across terrain that offered almost no cover. Saw the muzzle flashes from the tree line to their south. Saw, with the clarity of someone who'd flown this mission 100 times before, exactly how bad this was about to get. She rolled wings level, pulled the aircraft into a climbing turn that stressed the airframe but kept her energy high. Sabre 16, I have visual on your position and the enemy tree line. Standing by for clearance. Hog 37, you are cleared hot. Repeat, cleared hot. Adrian armed her weapons systems, selected the GAU-8, rolled into a dive that angled her directly down the throat of the valley. In the operations center, every eye was on the screen. The drone feed showed Adrian's A-10 diving toward the canyon like something falling from mythology. The aircraft looked impossibly large in that confined space, wings nearly spanning the width of the valley floor. "She's too low," the Marine liaison officer said. "Pull up. For God's sake, pull up." But Adrian Coves wasn't pulling up. She was lining up her shot with the precision of a surgeon, her targeting reticle fixed on the tree line where Taliban fighters were pouring fire toward the SEAL position. The A-10 was screaming now, airspeed building toward 300 knots in a descent so steep that the angle of attack indicators were lighting up her cockpit in warning yellows. At 800 feet above the valley floor, with rock walls blurring past on either side, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger fired with a sound that defied description. Not a bang but a rip, like reality tearing along a seam. 50 rounds per second of 30mm depleted uranium smashing into the tree line with enough kinetic energy to turn wood into splinters and earth into fountains of dirt. The aircraft shuddered. The gun's smoke filled the air behind her. And on the ground, the tree line that had been alive with muzzle flashes went suddenly, absolutely silent. Adrian pulled up hard, loading 4 GS onto the airframe as she climbed back out of the valley. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She just threaded a gun run through a space that most pilots wouldn't attempt in daylight with unlimited visibility. She'd done it at dusk, with crosswinds, with enemy forces less than 100 meters from friendlies. Sabre 16, Hog 37 is off target. Assess. There was a beat, too. Then the SEAL team leader's voice came back and something in it had changed. Hog 37. That was a goddamn surgical strike. Enemy forces are neutralized. We've got movement to the east now, approximately 30 contacts moving toward a blocking position. Adrian was already turning, already acquiring the new coordinates. Copy. I'll be back in 60 seconds. She ran 3 more passes over the next 10 minutes. Each time, she dove into that valley with margins so thin that her wingtips seemed to scrape the canyon walls. Each time, she pulled up with new battle-damaged small arms fire punching holes in non-critical systems, one round that cracked her canopy but didn't penetrate. Each time, she silenced enemy positions with precision that made everyone watching understand they were witnessing something beyond normal pilot skill. This was art. Violent, terrible art, but art nonetheless. On her 4th pass, surface-to-air missile warning lit up her cockpit. She saw the launch, a shoulder-fired Stinger coming up from the eastern ridge, deployed flares in a pattern that turned the sky into a cascade of white-hot magnesium, pulled into a climbing spiral that should have been impossible for an aircraft as heavy as the A-10. The missile went stupid, chasing a flare into the dirt. Hog 37, Sabre 16. That SAM was danger close to our position. You just saved our lives, again. Adrian didn't respond immediately. She was checking her fuel state, her ammunition count, her system's status. She had maybe 3 more gun runs before Winchester. Fuel was adequate for another 15 minutes on station. The question was whether 15 minutes would be enough. Sabre 16, what's your extraction plan? Hog, we've got helos inbound, but they're 20 minutes out. If you need to RTB. Negative. I'm staying until your ride shows up. The SEAL team leader's voice carried something that might have been gratitude, might have been awe. Copy, Hog 37. Thank you. In the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram, the Marine liaison officer was no longer laughing. He was staring at the screen with an expression that bordered on religious. She's been flying combat for almost 20 minutes in a valley that defeated 2 gun teams. How is she not dead? The Air Force captain watched Adrian execute another pass, her A-10 threading between ridgelines with movements so precise they looked choreographed. Because, he said quietly, she's Adrian Coves, and this is what she does. But even he didn't know the whole story. Didn't know about the daughter waiting at home with Adrian's mother, a 10-year-old girl named Sarah who'd learned to fall asleep to the sound of her mother's voice over satellite phone calls from war zones. Didn't know about the husband who died in a training accident 4 years earlier, leaving Adrian to raise their daughter alone while deploying to combat zones every 9 months. Didn't know that Reaper wasn't a call sign earned through aggression, but through the simple fact that Adrian Coves had become death for enemy forces and salvation for friendlies. She didn't take lives carelessly. She took them when necessary with surgical precision to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She was a single mother who happened to be one of the deadliest close air support pilots the Air Force had ever produced. The sun was gone now, full darkness spreading across the valley like ink. Adrian switched to night vision, her world turning green and pixelated. She could see the SEAL team more clearly on infrared, 8 heat signatures pressed into whatever cover they could find. Could see the Taliban fighters regrouping on the northern ridge, preparing for what they must have assumed would be a final assault under cover of darkness. They were wrong. Sabre 16, I've got approximately 20 contacts forming up on the northern ridge. Recommend you prepare for close danger support. This one's going to be tight. Hog 37, we trust your judgment. Those 5 words carried weight. Trust. From Navy SEALs who'd spent careers learning to trust only their teammates and their training, who'd watched Apache gunships wave off from this mission, who'd accepted that they might not survive the night. And now they were trusting a pilot they'd never met, flying an aircraft designed before some of them were born, to thread needle after needle in darkness with their lives hanging in the balance. Adrian rolled in for her 5th gun run. This time the enemy was ready. Tracers came up from multiple positions, crisscrossing the valley in patterns designed to create a kill box. She flew through them like they were rain, jinking left and right with movements so small and precise they seemed impossible for an aircraft this size. Acquired her target. Fired. The GAU-8 spoke its terrible language. The northern ridge lit up with impacts that looked like flashbulbs in her night vision. She pulled up, took 2 hits in her port engine. Warning lights flashed, oil pressure dropping, temperature rising. The A-10 was designed to fly with one engine, but it wasn't designed to do aerobatics on one engine in a narrow valley at night. Hog 37 is taking effective fire, one engine damaged but still mission capable. The Air Force captain's voice came back tight with concern. Hog 37, recommend you egress and let the backup package handle remaining support. Adrian looked at her fuel gauge, at her ammunition counter, at the map display showing the SEAL team's position and the helicopter package that was still 12 minutes out. She did the math, made her decision. Negative. Sabre 16 needs continuous coverage until extraction. I'm staying on station. Hog 37. I'm staying on station. Silence on the radio. Then from the SEAL team leader, Hog 37, Sabre 16, we've got your back if you need to punch out. The idea of Navy SEALs offering to protect her if she had to eject was both touching and absurd. Adrian keyed her mic with something that might have been a laugh. Appreciate that, Sabre 16, but I'm not planning on ejecting tonight. Stand by for another pass. She flew 3 more runs on one engine, each pass more difficult than the last as the damaged turbofan began to fail. Vibrations shook the airframe. Her instruments showed temperatures that should have triggered automatic shutdown. But the A-10 was built by Fairchild Republic to absorb punishment that would destroy any other aircraft. It was ugly, outdated, slow compared to modern fighters. But it was tough. And tonight, flown by a pilot who understood its capabilities down to the molecular level, it was unstoppable. On her 8th pass, she expended her last Maverick missile into a technical truck that was trying to maneuver into position for a final assault. The truck disappeared in a fireball that lit the entire valley. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off, fuel tanks rupturing. Taliban fighters scattered. Sabre 16, that's Winchester on missiles. I've got one more gun pass worth of ammunition, then I'm dry. Copy Hog 37. Hellos are 5 minutes out, if you can keep them suppressed. Consider them suppressed. Adrian armed the GAU-8 for the last time, rolled into the valley one final time. Her airspeed was lower now, the damaged engine struggling to maintain power. The vibrations were getting worse, but her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She'd flown damaged aircraft before, had landed an A-10 with half a wing missing over Baghdad, had brought home airframes that maintenance crews said should have been unflyable. She fired her last burst into an enemy position that was trying to set up a mortar. The GAU-8 went silent with 40 rounds still in the magazine. She'd held back just enough for emergency defensive fire. The mortar position ceased to exist. Winchester, Sabre 16, Hog 37 is out of offensive ordnance. Your Hellos should be inbound any second now. And there they were, two Blackhawks screaming into the valley at treetop level, their door gunners already firing suppressive bursts. The SEAL team moved with practiced efficiency, loading into the helicopters in under 90 seconds. Adrian held position overhead, her damaged A-10 circling like a wounded bird that refused to land. Hog 37, Sabre 16 is secure and egressing. You're cleared to RTB. Copy, good hunting, Sabre 16. Hog 37, the SEAL team leader paused. I don't know who you are, but you just saved 8 lives tonight. We won't forget it. Adrian turned toward Bagram, her damaged engine screaming. Just doing my job. Hog 37 RTB. The flight back took 15 minutes that felt like hours. The port engine finally quit completely 10 miles from base. She flew the remaining distance on one engine, nursing the aircraft through the darkness with the kind of intimate knowledge that only comes from thousands of hours in the cockpit. The tower cleared her for straighten emergency landing. Crash crews were standing by. She touched down with her good engine at full power, deployed the drag chute, and rolled to a stop with 300 feet of runway remaining. Cut the engine. Sat in the sudden silence, her hands finally beginning to shake with the adrenaline come down. Marcus Hayes was there when she climbed down from the cockpit. He looked at the battle damage over 40 holes, one engine completely destroyed, hydraulic fluid leaking from multiple systems, and shook his head in disbelief. Colonel, I've worked A-10s for 15 years. Never seen one take this much damage and still fly. Adrian pulled off her helmet. Her hair was matted with sweat. Her flight suit was soaked. She looked at her aircraft, this ugly, beautiful machine that had carried her through hell and brought her home again, and felt something catch in her throat. She's a good jet, Marcus. In the operations center, the Marine liaison officer who'd laughed when Adrian launched was now watching the after-action footage in silence. The Air Force captain stood beside him, arms crossed. That, the Marine said quietly, was the most impressive display of airmanship I've ever witnessed. The captain nodded. Welcome to the legend of Reaper 6. The next morning, Adrian found 8 Navy SEALs waiting outside her quarters. They stood at attention, led by the team leader she'd supported, a man named Connor Hayes, no relation to her crew chief. He held a Navy SEAL trident in his hand. Colonel Cove, sir, he offered the trident. This belonged to my brother. He died in Fallujah. I've been carrying it for 8 years, waiting to give it to someone who embodied what he believed in. Last night you earned it. Adrian looked at the 8 warriors standing before her, these men who represented the pinnacle of special operations capability, and understood what this moment meant. She took the trident with hands that had stopped shaking. I'll carry it with honor. Hayes nodded. We know you will, sir, because that's who you are. As they walked away, one of the younger SEALs looked back. Sir, what my team leader didn't say is that we would have died last night without you, all of us. We've worked with a lot of pilots, never seen anyone fly like that. You've got respect from every SEAL in this task force. Adrian watched them go, the trident heavy in her palm. She thought about her daughter, waiting at home, about the husband who'd never see their girl grow up, about all the missions, all the close calls, all the times she'd threaded the needle because someone on the ground needed her to be perfect. She walked to her damaged A-10, where Marcus and his crew were already beginning repairs. ran her hand along the scarred fuselage. This aircraft had been built in 1979, the same year she was born. They'd grown old together, accumulating scars and stories. Tonight they'd added another chapter. "Think she'll fly again?" she asked Marcus. He looked at the damage, did the mental calculations, and smiled. "Colonel, this is an A-10. She'll fly until the last rivet falls out, just like you." That night Adrian called home on the satellite phone. Her daughter answered on the second ring. "Mommy, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voice." "Grandma said you were on a mission. Did you help people?" Adrian looked out at the flight line, where her damaged A-10 sat under work lights as maintenance crews labored to bring her back to life. Thought about 8 Navy SEALs who were alive because she'd refused to wave off. About a valley in Helmand Province that would remember the sound of her gun. "Yeah, baby, I helped some people." "Good, that's what heroes do." Adrian felt tears she couldn't quite explain. "I'm not a hero, Sarah. I'm just a pilot who does her job." "Daddy used to say that doing your job when everyone else quits is what makes you a hero." The words hit like physical blows. Her husband's wisdom, carried forward by their daughter, reaching across death and distance to remind her why she kept deploying, kept flying, kept threading needles that should have killed her. "Your daddy was a smart man." "I know, I miss him." "Me too, baby, me too." After she hung up, Adrian sat in the darkness of her quarters and let herself cry. Not from fear or stress or trauma, from gratitude. She'd survived another mission, would see her daughter again, would have another chance to be the mother that Sarah deserved. The trident sat on her desk, catching moonlight through the window, a symbol of respect from warriors who understood what it meant to fly into hell for strangers, what it meant to be a single parent sacrificing time with family to protect other families, what it meant to be Adrian Coves. 3 days later, her A-10 was declared mission-capable. Marcus had worked around the clock, replacing the destroyed engine, patching the airframe, restoring systems that shouldn't have been restorable. When Adrian performed her pre-flight inspection, she found a new addition to the nose, a small painting of a Reaper figure holding a shield instead of a scythe. Underneath, someone had written, "Guardian of Saber 16." She traced the artwork with her fingers, thought about legends and legacies, about the stories that would circulate through ready rooms and special operations compounds, about how a female pilot approaching retirement had become something more than just competent, had become essential. That evening, the Air Force captain who'd run the Tactical Operations Center found her on the flight line. "Colonel Coves, I need to apologize." "For what?" "For doubting you. When I saw you were single ship, when I heard—" He stopped, embarrassed. "When I heard a woman's voice, I thought we were sending you to fail." Adrian looked at him steadily. "And now?" "Now I understand why forward air controllers request you by name, why SEALs trust you with their lives, why you've got more combat hours than most squadrons combined." He extended his hand. "It's an honor to work with you, sir." She shook his hand. "The honor's in the mission, Captain, not the person flying it." But she knew, as she walked back to her quarters, that wasn't quite true. The mission mattered, but so did the pilot. And sometimes, when the situation was desperate enough, when the margins were thin enough, when everyone else had waved off, sometimes what mattered most was someone willing to thread the needle one more time. Adrian Coves flew 37 more combat sorties before her deployment ended. Each one added to her legend. Each one brought more respect from people who'd never expected to respect her. Each one brought her closer to the moment when she'd rotate home, hug her daughter, and try to explain what it meant to be Reaper 6. She never quite found the words, but Sarah understood anyway, because she was the daughter of warriors, a mother who flew into fire and a father who died in service, and she knew that some things couldn't be explained, could only be honored. Years later, when Adrian finally retired and became an instructor at the Fighter Weapons School, students would ask about the mission in Helmand Province, about how she'd flown 8 passes through a kill box on one engine, about how she'd earned a Navy SEAL Trident despite never completing Bud S. She'd show them the Trident, now mounted in a shadow box alongside her medals, tell them about 8 warriors trapped in a valley, about an A-10 that refused to quit, about the simple mathematics of courage. Sometimes doing the right thing is also the hardest thing, and you do it anyway because people are counting on you to be perfect when perfect is impossible. That's the standard, she'd tell them. Not competence, not skill, perfection when it matters most, and the willingness to keep flying when everyone else has landed. Some students understood. Others didn't, not until they faced their own impossible mission and had to decide whether to wave off or thread the needle. Those who chose the needle always remembered Adrian's words, always remembered that somewhere in the history of military aviation, a single mother in an outdated attack jet had shown them what was possible when you refused to accept that anything was impossible. The legend of Reaper 6 spread beyond the Air Force. Army Rangers told the story. Marine Force recon units repeated it. Even Army helicopter pilots, who generally viewed A-10 pilots with friendly rivalry, spoke of that mission with reverence. It became the standard against which all close air support was measured. The proof that when seconds mattered and margins were non-existent, you wanted an A-10 pilot overhead. You wanted Adrian Coves. But the person herself remained unchanged. She flew her missions, came home to her daughter, and counted every safe landing as a victory more meaningful than any medal. She understood what civilians never could, that military service wasn't about glory or recognition or building legends. It was about showing up when needed, doing the impossible when required, and accepting that sometimes the price of protecting others was missing time with the people you loved most. Her daughter Sarah eventually joined the Air Force herself, became a pilot, requested assignment to A-10s. During her first combat deployment, she flew over that same valley in Helmand Province, now quieter, scarred by years of conflict but slowly healing, and understood in her bones what her mother had done. Had threaded this death trap in darkness with 8 lives depending on perfection. Had brought them all home. Sarah keyed her radio with hands that didn't shake. "This is Hog 33, on station and ready." And somewhere, in the eternal space where warriors recognize other warriors across time and distance, Adrian Coves smiled. The legacy wasn't in the medals or the stories or the legend. It was in the next generation of pilots learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was flying into the fire anyway because someone needed you to be extraordinary. The story of Reaper 6 became required reading at the Fighter Weapons School, became a case study in precision close air support, became the answer to anyone who questioned whether certain people belonged in certain cockpits, because Adrian Coves had proved, beyond any doubt or argument, that competence had no gender. That courage looked the same regardless of who demonstrated it. That when the mission required someone to be perfect in impossible circumstances, the only thing that mattered was whether they had the skill, the will, and the absolute refusal to quit. Even Navy SEALs warriors who defined modern special operations, who set standards others could only aspire to, were shaken by what she'd accomplished. Not because it was impossible, but because it was exactly possible enough to survive if you were willing to risk everything for people you'd never met. That's the part they never forgot. Adrian Coves had flown into hell for strangers, had threaded needles that should have killed her, had brought everyone home, including herself, because that was the job. That was the standard. That was what it meant to be Reaper 6. The single dad's A-10s card, patched, rebuilt after that mission but still carrying the weight of what it had endured, flew for another 8 years before final retirement. When it was decommissioned and sent to the boneyard, maintenance crews found something Adrian had written inside the cockpit, hidden where only someone doing major maintenance would see it. For Sarah, fly like they need you to be perfect. Land like you need to be home. Those words became the unofficial motto of every close air support pilot who followed, a reminder that the mission mattered, but so did coming home. That courage was measured not just in what you risked, but in what you protected. That sometimes the greatest heroism was simply refusing to fail when failure meant good people died. Adrienne Coves lived to see her daughter retire as a full colonel, having compiled her own legendary combat record. Lived to hold her granddaughter, who would grow up hearing stories about 2 generations of warriors who'd flown into fire and brought everyone home. Lived to understand that the legend of Reaper 6 wasn't really about her at all. It was about every pilot who'd ever strapped into a cockpit knowing they might not come back. About every warrior who'd ever faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. About the simple truth that when people needed saving, someone had to be willing to thread the needle. Adrienne Coves just happened to be extraordinarily good at it. And even Navy SEALs warriors who feared nothing and respected little were shaken by how good. Because they'd seen what perfection looked like under fire, had trusted their lives to someone they'd never met and watched her deliver a masterclass in precision, courage, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. That trust became sacred. That respect became legacy. And that missionate passes through hell in a damaged aircraft flown by a single parent who'd already given everything to service became the story that reminded everyone what was possible when you simply refused to quit. The sky remembers these things. The valleys remember. The warriors who walked away alive remember. And somewhere in the eternal space where legends are born, the story continues. Of a woman named Adrienne Coulson Reaper who showed the world that heroism isn't about who you are. It's about what you do when everyone is counting on you to be perfect. And she was.